Porsena was the king of Clusium. He was an Etruscan. He became the first foreign force to ever put Rome under siege. And in fact, he was so successful at it that it was just a matter of time before Rome capitulated. But the city was saved by the courage of one Gaius Mucius Cordus, his courage in particular to withstand the pain of burning his own hand. I welcome you to my YouTube channel where I explore ancient texts, and ancient texts here I mean texts that have been around for thousands of years. I try to find interesting stories in them and tales. At the moment I'm going through the book from the founding of the city by Titus Livius or Livy. The book is a collection of books actually, and they were written about 2000 years ago, and they cover the history of Rome from around 720 something BCE to around 0 AD or 0 BCE when Titus Livius passed on. Subscribe if you've not subscribed so that you don't miss any of the videos that I get to publish. After the Tarquins were defeated, that is Superbus, he had come to Rome with some army of people from Veii and Tarquini, and then he was defeated, and of course Brutus dies in that battle. He goes back, and this time round he goes and he talks to another king, and the name of this king is Porsena. Now Porsena was the king of Clusium, and there is one thing about Porsena. His power and reputation were well known in the ancient world of that part or that region of the world. His neighbors feared him because he was aggressive and he was very good at war, and he was hard to defeat. Because he was an Etruscan, Superbus goes to him and he uses the same argument he used to persuade the Tarquinis and the Veii people, and that is that I'm an Etruscan and I've been chased away from Rome and I am the king there. I need your help. Help me as a fellow Etruscan regain that throne. That's basically the argument he brought to Porsena. Now, he also told him that if you don't help me capture this throne, get it back, it's like you are encouraging the people to start toppling kings. If you don't do something, it might come to your own family, yourself. And that was very persuasive because Porsena is also thinking, I'm the king. If the Romans are let to get away with this, then my own people might decide one day to get rid of me or my family as the monarch. Livy tells us that according to Superbus, this is what he was telling Porsena, that kingly power was the most beautiful thing among gods and among mortals, and it needed to be protected. And with that kind of argument, of course, Superbus managed to persuade Porsena to help him, and Porsena accepted to help, and he put together an army and marched on Rome. The Roman Senate was alarmed to learn that Porsena was coming. Because they knew who he was and how effective he was as a general or a commander. In fact, they were so afraid, and they were even more afraid that if the people get to know that it's Porsena coming, the people will so easily be overcome by fear and in fact just invite or admit Tarquin into the city. That was the fear, especially among the senators. Nevertheless, the senators prepared for this attack, and they understood that it was mostly going to be a siege. The Romans seemed like they understood they did not have the power to go against Porsena. So they ordered the stocking of food, corn, salt, and other essential supplies because they understood this was going to take a while. And they also exempted, they were called plebs. This word plebs, I did come across it in 1984 by George Orwell. Seems like it comes from ancient Rome, and these are like the ordinary people. The Senate exempts the ordinary people from paying fees for using the harbor and also war tax. These were like steps taken to incentivize them to stand with the state so that they don't run away when they hear that Porsena is coming. When Porsena is spotted, everyone flees into the city. Livy tells us that even soldiers who were expected to stand and protect the city, some threw away their arms and went into the city. While the city was protected with walls and the river Tiber, it was still vulnerable, and especially through, Livy tells us, through the Sublician bridge over the Tiber. Indeed, Porsena almost captured the bridge itself on his arrival. It took the actions of one man to prevent that from happening, and that is one Audacious Cordus. Now, Audacious Cordus saw it coming. He saw that Porsena is coming and the city is vulnerable because the bridge is still standing. And once he crosses that bridge, or once he captures that bridge, that's it. Rome falls. Now, what Cordus does, Cordus alongside a few soldiers, while the rest ran into the city, he managed to persuade a few soldiers. Livy tells us it was a very small number. And they decided to hold Porsena by fighting him with some resistance for a moment while other soldiers were dismantling the bridge. And once the bridge was dismantled, Cordus and a small band of armies jumped into River Tiber and swam to the city. Of course, Porsena now could not just walk into the city with the bridge gone. He stationed his soldiers at strategic places around the city. And these goals were to prevent any supplies from getting in and therefore suffocate the city to submission. That took a while, and Romans could not even go out to graze their animals. That's what Livy tells us. Soon, the supplies were running low. Most people had given up and decided that they were going to be captured by Porsena, and Superbus was coming back as the king. But one young noble by the name Gaius Mucius Cordus decided to do something about the situation. He decided he wasn't just going to sit there and just watch and wait for Superbus to come to power or for Porsena to capture the city. So he comes up with a plan to go alone to the Porsena's camp and do a daring thing he describes as a greater deed. That's how he described his plan. And initially he wants to just swim across the river Tiber and go to the camp of Porsena, but he decides against that because it's like, if I do that without informing the Senate, then I might be captured by Romans themselves and then I will be accused of defecting. So he didn't want to do that. So what he does, he goes to the Senate and he asks them for permission to cross the river Tiber and go to the camp of Porsena and do this deed he was talking about. So this is what he tells the Senate. I wish, fathers, to swim the Tiber, and if I can, enter the enemy's camp, not as a pillager, nor to inflict retaliation for their pillaging. I am purposing with heaven's help a greater deed. The Senate gives their approval and he leaves. He has a sword concealed under his robe and he crosses the river Tiber and sneaks into Porsena's camp. He is not noticed, and once he gets into the camp, he just mingled with the rest of the people in the camp, Porsena's army, of course, and other people, and nobody was able to notice that he was a stranger amidst them. And then he's moving around there, and then it turns out that day was a soldier's payday. So there was a bench somewhere or a table, and the soldiers were going there and getting paid and leaving. And he looks at the table, he sees two individuals, and he's so sure that one of them is the king. But unfortunately, these two people are dressing the same, exactly the same. That's what Livy tells us. He doesn't know who is the king. He can't ask, because if he asks, then people will recognize him as a stranger if he doesn't know who the king is. So he doesn't ask. So what he does, he just decides to take a chance. And he goes and he strikes and kills one of the two, hoping that it was the king, Porsena. But it turns out it wasn't Porsena, that was his secretary. And of course he tries to run away, he's captured and is brought before Porsena. At that point, he decides to come up with a new plan. His initial plan was to assassinate the king, but it has not worked. Now he has to come up with a new plan. Seems like this was a very smart guy. He decides to trigger the fear of the king, and he hopes that works against the king. And this is what he says to the king. I am a citizen of Rome. Men call me C. Mucius. As an enemy, I wish to kill an enemy, and I have as much courage to meet death as I had to inflict it. It is the Roman nature to act bravely and to suffer bravely. I am not alone in having made this resolve against you. Behind me there is a long list of those who aspire to the same distinction. If then it is your pleasure, make up your mind for a struggle in which you will every hour have to fight for your life and find an armed foe on the threshold of your royal tent. This is the war which we, the youths of Rome, declare against you. You have no serried ranks, no pitched battle to fear. The matter will be settled between you alone and each one of us singly. So that's what Mucius tells the king. The king is furious, yes, but he's also terrified about what he's hearing. That now he has to be worried about the possibility of some random guy from the crowd coming up to him and maybe stabbing him to death. So he fears about that, and he threatens that if this guy doesn't explain himself, he is going to roast him. Mucius continues. He tells him, look and learn how lightly those who regard their bodies have some great glory in view. And then he puts his hand into the fire, his right hand, and he holds it there, and he's not moving. He doesn't seem like he's feeling any pain. He's just standing there looking at the king while his hand is burning. And the king is astounded, of course, and he springs up from his seat and he orders that Mucius be removed from the altar. And he looks at him and he tells him, go, you have been a worse enemy to yourself than to me. I will invoke blessing on your courage if it were displayed on behalf of my country. As it is, I send you away, exempt from all rights of war, and hurt and safe. So the king was impressed by this young man, and he decides, I had threatened to roast him, and he roasts his hand. So I don't think there is worse I can do to him, really. Let me just let him go. And he leaves Mucius. Mucius leaves. And Mucius, before he leaves, he decides to add even more fear to the king, because he realizes that it is working. And he tells him, since you honor courage, know that what you could not gain by threats you can have obtained by kindness. 300 of us, the more foremost amongst the Roman youth, have sworn to attack you in this way. The lot fell to me first, the rest in the order of their lot will come, each in his turn, till fortune shall give us a favorable chance against you. He tells the king that he's played this game well. The king is now very anxious, and Mucius is let go after everything that happened. The Romans started calling him Scaevola because he had lost his right hand, of course. Porsena sends envoys to Rome. He's so scared. That's how this young man was able to do a good job. And he sends envoys to Rome, and he asks for peace treaty. He doesn't want to continue fighting the Romans. The Romans accept that, and they sign a treaty. After that happened, of course, Gaius Mucius Cordus is rewarded. Also rewarded is Horatio Pocors, who made it possible for the bridge to be demolished before Porsena comes into the city. With that having happened, Porsena was still thinking that there was a possibility of him keeping his promise to Superbus and having him reinstated as the king of Rome. And so he decides to choose diplomacy. And he sends a group of ambassadors to Rome to negotiate that Superbus should be allowed back to be the king. And Rome, at this point, they understand that Porsena cannot do anything really. But they decide they want to settle this matter once and for all. And they pick the most honorable of senators and they send them to Porsena. And these senators go to him and they explain to him that Rome was not a monarchy but a free city, and that that was not going to change. That's what basically they tell him. And they beg him that he should allow Rome to be free. When Porsena was told that, this is what he says: "Since this is your fixed and unalterable determination, I will not harass you by my fruitless proposal, nor will I deceive the Tarquins by holding out hopes of an assistance which I am powerless to render. Whether they insist on war or are prepared to live quietly, in either case they must seek another place of exile than this, to prevent any interruption of the peace between you and me." So Porsena has now given up completely. Of course, Superbus Tarquinius is disappointed. He leaves the land of Porsenas and he goes to stay with his son-in-law, a guy who went by the name Mamilius Octavius, who was a tyrant or a leader of a city known as Tusculum. So that's where he goes. And Rome and Porsena sign a treaty of peace. But Tarquinius, that was not the end of him. He did try again.